Hi guys. Oh good, you can hear me. Everyone has some paper and stuff, and the reason is, you may want to take some notes. It might be useful, might not be useful. You never know when something is useful or not. But then you've got paper there so you can look at it. If you can read your own writing, that's pretty good. You may not be able to read it because we don't write very much now, do we? If you noticed, I mean, the women in here have learned really good cursive. I don't know if it's, I don't want to be sexist, but women have really good writing skills. I don't think it's inherited. Maybe it is inherited, but they know how to do it. If I look at writing, and it's got really good script writing, and it comes from a guy, I go, how did you do that so well? Because I learned block writing. That's not what I'm going to be discussing, because my writing isn't very good, so I learned to type quickly. Yeah, actually, I worked in a gumball factory when I was an adolescent, my uncle's gumball factory, and he said, I'm not a big guy, I don't know if you've noticed, I used to be 6'5", but I've shrunk. But in the gumball factory, he said, you can work in the front with the girls in the front, typing invoices if you learn to type fast. So I took typing 1 and typing 2. Typing 2 in Chicago in the summer, typing 2, 18 girls in the class, 2 guys. I got an A in the class, but I didn't score. And you know what I mean by that. You know what I mean by that. It's a funny thing. So I want to talk to you about a few things today and put this sort of in a category. Now, 20 years ago, it's been that long, well, I do radio, and I do TV, and I do newspaper, my newspaper column. And I do that because I thought many, many years ago that I think it's important to communicate interesting medical things that can make a difference in your life, and to do it in a digestible form, a form that you can understand. And it doesn't mean dumbing down, it means using the right words. So in medicine, we use the word myocardial infarction. You may know that or not, but heart attack is the common word. So why do we say myocardial infarction to a patient? And you may say that, you may hear that in the hospital. Oh, your husband, your wife had a myocardial infarction. And then you're kind of embarrassed to say, well, what does that mean? Because you think you should know what it means, and in fact, it's just a lingo. It's just a word that we use that really is not necessary. Because we've never really been taught in medicine how to communicate in that way. We use scientific terms. Anyway, that really was a very important part of what I like to do with everything that I do in terms of communication. But about 20 years ago, I wrote this book called The Longevity Code, Your Personal Prescription for a Longer, Sweeter Life. And at that time, a radio show was going. It's been going for 35 years. It was moving forward. We were in New York, we were in California, and a bunch of Florida, a bunch of different places. Random House, an imprint of Random House, published the book, went to bookstores. Remember bookstores all over? I went on a book tour to a number of bookstores. I thought it would be fun. Turns out it's not as much fun as I thought it was, because you're traveling around, you don't have your family with you. But anyway, and we sold around close to 50,000 copies, which is really good for a self-help book. But after you write a book, the first thing you want to do is go, I would never have written that. It's very difficult. And I had a writer who wrote with me. And then, since I've been doing a column for the last 10 years, I realized that I could write. Now, in the Chicago public schools, if you misspelled 1 word, it was a B. 2 words, it was a C. 3 words, it was a D. I never got above a D, because nobody in my family wrote. We didn't have any books in our house. Maybe we had 2 books. My parents read the newspaper, they watched TV. None of my family read it all. So we really didn't have a history of writing. I didn't realize that I could write and could communicate. But I mentioned that for a whole bunch of reasons that I will eventually get to. So when I wrote this book 20 years ago, I thought for about the last 5 years, I wanted to write a new book and a new concept. And I'm going to share some of these thoughts with you, taking things from the old book that was thick, it was like 300 pages, and move it into a new book, something that you could open up and finish in 1 hour. Now we're doing 1 hour and a half. In other words, small amount, which would actually give bottom line information, which would have cartoons in it. It would be like a graphic novel. So it would have cartoons, just like we used to see political cartoons and other cartoons, funny cartoons in the newspaper. Cartoons would move that information. So I want to share to you some ideas that I have not of that book, but bottom line stuff that I think we should all think about. So I think there are 5 pillars, I call them pillars now, that really affect what I call a long, sweet life. So 5 pillars. So picture it, if you go to a food court, let's go to a food court on Westtown. You may go to different places to get food, but you're looking all around deciding what am I going to eat today? What am I going to do today? But there are 5 different pillars that affect your life, and if you really kind of make all of those 5 pillars shine, you have the best chances of living a life with less disability. I won't promise no disability. It will have sweetness in it, and it will have length with it. Now, nobody wants a short life that's sweet. Look at James Dean. You've got a picture of James Dean. He looked really handsome. He had a good life. Died in a motorcycle crash. Why? Going too fast. Died in a motorcycle crash. I mean, that's ultimately what happened. And young men often suffer from something I call testosterone dementia, where testosterone goes through their lives, and they do wild and crazy things. And then often, if they have a child, that begins to change. They begin to actually put on their seatbelt and drive a little bit slower. And my trainer, I've got a great trainer, because I'm allergic to exercise, so I need somebody to help me train. Come on in, there are things in the back to take notes, and you don't get out without a test, by the way. So I want this trainer. He's young. Everyone's younger than me. Well, some of you are older than me. But I'm at a point where most of them are younger than me. I went to the dentist in Oregon. I love it. He just got out of middle school. And he really does a great job. It's amazing how quickly they learn today. They learn to read when they're 4, and they become a dentist in middle school. Anyway, but I look at my trainer. So here it was. He just had a baby, okay? So I noticed the difference in what he drove over a period. I've had him for about 10 years. First at the university, where he was in kinesiology. Then he became a physical therapist. Now he's a trainer. He works in Verona, has a place on Monroe Street. He used to have a motorcycle. Then that went to a big truck, and a big truck with camping, and he's now turned that into a minivan to take a child home from the hospital. So just looking at how he's changed, just looking at what you drive can show, how you change. There are very few, if no, motorcycles out there. But that's an important thing that I mentioned. So, I think of life in some ways like an hourglass. Remember those hourglasses for 3 minutes for an egg? By the way, a 3-minute egg doesn't work. It's got to be 6 minutes. At 3 minutes, it's all running. Remember those little hourglasses? It was so much fun. And you look at it in 3 minutes. What if your life were 3 minutes? It would be terrible, 24 minutes. But we do have an hourglass. We do. And we started with the life at the very beginning that really has a long amount of life. And when we're 14, when we're 8 or 9, and we're 6, we don't even know what time is, right? What's the clock? Now, a lot of kids don't know how to read that clock back there because it's a round circle, but they can learn because they understand it. And once you begin to understand time, you begin to understand boredom and that time is ending. So somewhere around 4th grade or 5th grade, when kids realize, gee, summer vacation is going to end, time begins. And time is our own construct as humans. Yes, we have 24 hours, but we use time to decide what we're doing. In our 20s, we kind of seem like we have a long time. My wife and I traveled in Asia for a year in our 20s. And I think back to that. We didn't have any health insurance. We didn't even think about health insurance. But as time goes on, we have to realize that we have less time. And I think that's a very critical issue. And the reason is, the mistakes that we make now, we may not be able to pick up and have enough time to change. That's exactly what it is. So you want to look at your time as limited. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be depressed over it, because I think about it, you go through life with one eye open and one eye closed, but you've got to be rational about it. And I was thinking about it this morning. I have a little trolley that I used. I had a big fracture, trimillular fracture in my ankle. I was out in California visiting my good friend from high school. My wife was there in a dog park, had a fracture, ultimately needed some surgery. And I was thinking about that because my wife Penny was there with me. We stayed for a week at Larry's house. Well, Larry died about 2 months ago, nothing half 2 months ago. And my wife Penny died a year and a half ago. And I thought, I'm the last one standing. Now, we were all in pretty good shape. Why did it happen? Well, he died of Parkinsonism that has nothing to do with bad, with what he didn't do anything bad to produce that. And she died ultimately because of brain dysfunction, and we'll talk about that. Dementia, which I think is a bad word, but Alzheimer's or a combination of different things, which also she didn't do. She didn't smoke, she didn't do any of the bad stuff. And that's because many things occur within our health that we can control, and there are other things that occur that are random. We don't like to think of it as random. We like to think about everything as having purpose. So if you look, for instance, at identical twins, okay, perfect example. Identical twins have the same genome. They're identical, okay, same genome. If you look at identical twins that have very, very similar lifestyles, don't smoke, don't drink to excess, eat right. If one twin gets breast cancer, the chances of the other one are getting it are 20%. If one twin gets colon cancer, it's about 20 to 25%. Same for prostate cancer. So 75% pretty much is the unknown. But what can we do with that unknown is really the issue. In other words, what can you manipulate today that can make a difference in your life? That's really the question. So there are 5 pillars, and I'm going to go through a few things that you can do in these 5 pillars. It's not going to be exhaustive. In 45 minutes, I'm not going to give you the secret of a long life. But you have your own secret of what you can do because each one of you is individual. I'll give you a really good example. Look at all the restaurants. Now, I was thinking about this the other day. In Oregon, the town that I practiced for 45 years, and I still fill in part-time, there are 25 places that you can get prepared food. If you found the Quick Trip and you do the Hy-Vee, which was Bill's, and then you look at all of the other things, you look at the hot dog place, you look at the Mexican food place, 25 places where you can get prepared food. That was not the case 50 years ago when you were around. You didn't get prepared food. And by the way, when you get prepared food, you actually don't know what you're getting, except you're getting prepared food. There's a very important part there in terms of health and wellness that I'll talk about a bit with diet. But things change over time. We're now at this time. So what do we have in these 5 spheres? So there is, and I'm going to go through them, a physical sphere, your body, and I'll go through each of them. A mind, mood, and brain, your mental sphere, what's above your shoulder. When you're sitting here right now, 20% of the energy you consume is going to your brain. It's an energy suck. The brain uses about 400 to 500 calories a day, and you only need about 1,800 to 2,000 calories. It's amazing how much calories the brain needs. And the brain, by the way, has no reserve at all, which is why if the brain doesn't get energy in 3 minutes, you faint, and in 6 minutes, maybe 3.5 minutes, you go into a coma, and in 6 minutes, you die. So the brain has no energy store of itself. But it's an amazing organ, trillions of connections in there. So you have mind and brain and mood. That's the second pillar. The third is social interaction. Think about COVID. We couldn't have interaction with people. The fourth one is spiritual, religious, whatever nourishes your heart and your soul. And the final sphere is material, where you live and how you live. And I want to give you some ideas and some tips of what you can do with that. Now, normally I used to start in the body sphere, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to the material sphere first, your environment and where you live, because I think that's really much more of an issue than we really even think about with that. So I want you to go home. I want you to write on a sheet of paper that you're going to do an inventory of your house, okay? Write that down, and there's a reason for that. I want you to go through your house with new eyes, and think about this. I'm going to give you a good example of our junk drawer in the house. Everyone's got a junk drawer in their kitchen. And if you don't have a junk drawer, you must not have a kitchen or you live in a trailer. And then you have a junk, and then you've got a junk trailer. But I'm looking at this junk drawer, and I thought, what do? I can't get the stuff out of it. And I took the whole drawer, threw it into a laundry basket, and then put back in the drawer those things that were important. You would be surprised how neat that drawer looks, because 75% of it I didn't need. I could then throw out. So that's why I want you to go home and look at a fresh view of your house, something you haven't done. So I want you to look, first of all, at the outside of the house. I want you to look at the lighting. is there enough light for you to be able to function in the evening when you go out? Now, there's a reason behind why I want you to look at it. If we look at trauma, trauma as a cause of death is a major problem in young people, like guys with testosterone dementia, and old people who slip and fall. And Wisconsin is #1 for death by falling. #1. If you fall over the age of 65, most of you are over the age of 65, break your hip, within 1 year, 25 to 30% of you will be dead. Period. Why are you dead? Not just from the fall, because you may go get your hip taken care of or your pelvis has been broken, but for all of the other complications. You don't breathe as well and you get a pneumonia. You don't eat as well, you don't get out, you don't do other things. So the goal is not to fall. So I want you to look at the outside of your house. I want you to look at things. I want you to look at the stairs outside. Just go around and say, hey, can I fall here? Can I fall over there? And then I want you to go and look inside the house. And I want you to look at those beautiful throw rugs that you picked up on that vacation in Chicago because you thought they were really beautiful. And they were, and they are beautiful, that you've had for maybe 10 or 20 years because you really don't pick up your feet as well as you did 20 years ago. Because slipping and falling on those throw rugs is terrible. And the throw rug really doesn't care. And for the most part, you got to get rid of them. Now, they're really hard to do, so roll them up, put them in the basement, and your kids will get rid of them years from now. Because you can't get rid of it. I'm not recommending you get rid of it. Shove it in the basement, put it in the garage, deal with it later. You probably won't. But the throw rugs are very, very important to look at because that's where a lot of people fall. Look at the lighting in the house. Is it bright enough? Go around and look at it. Do you have night lights all around the house? Is there a clear, this is the material sphere, it's only the material pillar. Is there an easy way for you to get from the bed to the bathroom? Because most of you do go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I'm going to make an aside here. There's a book called A Gentleman in Moscow. If you like to read, it's great. Anton Tolles. It's also a series on Paramount Plus with Ian McGregor. Really, really nice. Anyway, he talked about the fact that in A Gentleman from Moscow, it's a really good story. But in the middle of it, he's got to go into their room. He's in a hotel, and he has to steal their finished passports. And he said, I'm really lucky because they went out late at night. It was 1:30 in the morning. They went out of town, and they had a few drinks, and they were 40 years old. He said if they were 20, and he went in an hour and a half later, he said if they were 20 years old, they would have been in each other's arms. Right? He's saying sex without saying each other's arms. If they were 60 years old, they will have gone back up and down to the bathroom, and they'd still be awake. But luckily, they were 40 years old and realized that a good night's sleep is exactly what a vacation is all about at 40 years old. So you guys are in the 60-year-old category, maybe you're in the 20-year-old category, but you get up and down. Is there a clear way to go to the bathroom? Bathroom is a dangerous place. What about those rugs that are in the bathroom? Are they secure? Do they move around? Look at the rugs that you come out of the shower, you look at the rugs, see whether or not the rugs are stable and they're not going to move. Very important. Is the shower slippery? Do you have a chair in the shower? Do you have grab bars up in the shower? This is where a lot of death occurs. When you get up in the middle of the night, do you sit by the side of the bed for 20 or 30 seconds before you get up so you are not dizzy? Very important. And then in the bathroom, after you've been on the commode, do you wait 20 or 30 seconds before you get up? Because when you Valsalva to get out that constipated stool, maybe you're not constipated, but the Valsalva, as you're doing that, that actually reduces some of the pressure of the blood that goes to your brain. And so when you stand up, it may take a couple of heartbeats for you to be able to capture yourself and get yourself, because your blood pressure goes down. Very important things to think about that you do not get from your doctor's office. Do not, come on in, and there's stuff to write things out. This is an important part of your material environment. There are a lot of other things that you can do within that. There's something else that I'm going to mention. I want a show of hands. How many of you have had a durable power of attorney for healthcare? Come on, show of hands. Okay. Is that everyone here? Show of hands, how many of you don't have a durable power of attorney for healthcare? Okay, so let me explain something about it. First of all, death is not an elective event. It is prescribed. And we're all going in that direction. And we do not know when we're going to get there. maybe a car accident, maybe that. And if you remember Terry Schiavo years ago, it was a whole thing with the fact that Terry Schiavo was dead. She was dead. Her brain, she was just doing reflex. She had a young person. She had never signed over a power of attorney. Took the husband, who she had lived with for 10 or 12 years, to basically get control through the Supreme Court, a whole issue, political issue, get control and say she really is brain dead, which the doctors agreed, but her eyes were open before it was shut off. And she lived really in misery for about 8 or 9 years. You don't want that to happen to you. You don't want politicians, I don't care if you're blue or red or green or yellow or none of the above, you don't want them making the decision. You want a loved one to make that decision if you can't, period. Nobody would disagree with that at all. So it's very important to write a power of attorney. You can go to the State of Wisconsin website, put it down. You can go to the library, Fitchburg Library. They'll take care of it. You can talk to the senior citizen section here. You must have a durable power of attorney. And make sure it's up to date, and make sure it's in your electronic medical record. Write it down if you don't have it, and check to make sure it's done properly. I'll give a good example that happened to me. So my wife, Penny, as I mentioned, passed a year and a half ago. I miss her every day, but she's always here with me. She's probably over there looking at me because she would never look directly at me when I'm talking. And here it is. She had fractured, she fell down, fractured her hip, and was going to go from Stoughton Hospital over to St. Mary's Care Center. And no problem, I should have custody because she didn't have the ability to do things. I'm then the one who's going to now make the decisions. So the social worker picked up the power of attorney that we had 8 or 9 years before, and she said, we can't use this. So what? Well, there's not a date next to her, one of the witnesses. They were from my office. So the witness had forgotten to put a date down. And she said Medicare may not allow you to actually get Medicare for skilled nursing to take care of her if I do this. But we can have somebody else. If you have a friend who has been with you for 20, 30 years, I will accept that with that friend to actually do another one with that. I had never bothered to look at it. It was sitting in the medical record. Check your durable power of attorney. Check it to see. While you're at it, how many of you don't have a will? Good. Well, you need to have a will. If you don't have a will, you don't know where it goes. It's made by a judge. It's a decision that's made. So this is the other part of the material sphere. You want to protect any money you have. Obviously, you want to look at it. And the final thing before I get onto the next sphere is Medicare, and looking at Medicare and Medicare Advantage, and looking at Medicare Part D, and looking at every year to look at your drugs to see if you should change Medicare Part D every year. And the reason is, yes, it may be trouble changing it, but if you're on expensive meds, the difference can save you hundreds of dollars a year easily. Now, while we're on medicines, I'm going to talk about something else. So Fitchburg Family Pharmacy, you know, they're down here. And one of the questions I had, and this is in the physical sphere that I'm going to get to. So let's jump from the material sphere, you know, your environment that you live in, now to the physical sphere. A few things that you should do. You can get an evaluation of your meds to see whether or not you should be on everything that you're on. Now, a lot of times you end up in the hospital and you're put on something that you don't need that may not do anything. I'll give you a good example of a worthless drug. Colace, stool softener. It's bullshit. Sorry, Mom. I did say bullshit. You said full of hops or bull. But it doesn't do anything. It turns out it actually is a drug that doesn't do very much at all for stools. Miralax, Senecot, those are drugs that are very useful. Metamucil, very good for constipation. All of those things. The stool softener is pretty much worthless. And so you may be spending money on it, doesn't do very much, you've never been taken off. So de-prescribing, not prescribing, but de-prescribing can be a major issue. And also, some of the drugs you're on may make you dizzy, and you don't know it because there's an interaction. So I wrote Fitchburg Family Pharmacy because they're really good. And he wrote me back that they actually do it. They do a charge. I don't know what the charge is, but they can look at your medicines and see whether or not there is any interaction at all. Now, sometimes your other pharmacists will know too, but they will actually go over the medicines that you have to reduce, as he is. And our team works to reduce unneeded medications and look at a transition of care. And by the way, they also will prepackaged medicines for you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that and the importance of that. I was on an airplane last year going to India. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I often take something to sleep, very mild, but I didn't for a whole bunch of reasons. And I heard, is there a doctor on the flight? And I'm going to India. It's like an 18-hour flight. There's a doctor on the airplane. I figured I have to get up, which I did. I got up. And a big airplane. I was the only one there. And there was a woman there who was like this. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and what was going on. And through a whole series of things, it took about 20 minutes, 30 minutes for me to figure out, because she spoke Urdu, which is an Indian language. Somebody else spoke Hindi and Urdu, and then somebody else spoke English and Hindi. That it took a while, but she probably had a seizure, and this is post-seizure, okay? Well, it turned out we're in the middle of the flight. She's older. Did she take her pills this morning? The person next to her says, well, she always takes her pills herself. Maybe she didn't, right? You're going on an airplane, you're in a rush, and it was more than 24 hours since she took her pill, and that was probably it. I mention this because if you have trouble taking your medicines, or you know somebody, you can get them pre-packaged, if you can't package it, in a bottle, and make sure you figure out how to do that, especially if you're caring for a loved one. So medicine, we're talking about the physical sphere. You want to look and see if all the medicines you have are correct and are the right ones. Talk to your physician, talk to your pharmacist, or get an evaluation. And the reason is, quite often when people come after the hospital, they're put on things like Colace and other medicines that they no longer need, and nobody has spent the time to do that because, frankly, there's not enough time to do it. That's ultimately the bottom line. Okay, so what else is in the physical sphere? Let's look at supplements, okay? Now, I am not a great believer in supplements, except for ones that I think are either proven and not. So one of the things I recommend is vitamin D. I think vitamin D, 2,000 units a day, very useful. Why? I think it's just useful. The data is still out on vitamin D. You know, we live in Wisconsin, the sun isn't out all the time. And frankly, for you to get enough vitamin D in the middle of the winter, you'd have to go out there, take off your clothes for about 15, 20 minutes in the sun, sit out there, in which case, not only would you freeze, but somebody would come and take you away. Because that would be the way. So vitamin D, 2,000 international units, I think are very useful. Let's look at calcium. Now, calcium should not just be getting, calcium is an element. You shouldn't just get calcium, a mineral rather, shouldn't just get calcium from inorganic sources. You can take 1 Tums, 500 milligrams a day, very good, or the 750 milligram tablet, but the 500 is better. The 750 can be too much because you get a higher calcium level that theoretically may affect how your heart works for that 20 minutes that it's actually going through there. I recommend a 500 milligram. And then you want to get the rest through dairy. Dairy is a good way. If you're vegetarian or vegan, go to the net, go to web. You'll find out all these things that also have calcium in it. Now, a container of yogurt has about 400 milligrams of calcium, but also it can be present in milk. Now, milk is really very good. The problem with milk is that it can be caloric, it's sweet, and it has some protein in it, which is okay. So I have a good friend of mine who drinks skim milk. I hate skim milk. I hate skim milk. I don't like it. But all of a sudden, I have a different view of it because it's a way to get calcium. I think of skim milk now as flavored water. And let me tell you something. It changes the whole thing about it. So I am now having flavored water with my dinner. And it's not skim. I mean, I don't think of it as milk. I think of it as flavored water because you can get quite a bit of calcium from flavored water called skim milk. And that's very, very useful. What else do you need? What else do you need? You need to have, I mean, those are the supplements. Now, what about a multivitamin? Well, I go back and forth on multivitamins. But multivitamins, I go back and forth for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's no proof in certain ways that they're going to do anything. On the other hand, there is some proof that people don't eat well. Do not look at multivitamins as a substitute for good eating, and that's the issue with it. Oh, I don't eat very well, but I take a lot of vitamins and supplements. Forget it. I think a multivitamin, if you're going to take it in addition. What should you get? Get a house brand which is cheap and inexpensive. Costco, Walgreens, CVS, Target, Walmart, Amazon. For $15, you can get a whole year's supply of multivitamins. If it says 100% of the minimum daily requirements, and it has the initials USP, which means US Pharmacopoeia, that means it meets the standards of dissolution, of dissolving in your body. Sometimes, if you look at your poop, you may see a skeleton of a multivitamin in there. But I don't like to swallow big tablets. I just don't like it. So I now get the gummies. Just make sure you don't just make sure that you don't misplace those gummies with the gummies that come from Illinois. Now I'm going to make a little aside to that because it's really part of the physical sphere. I think one of the issues with THC and cannabis is the feds, because it's put in the same category as heroin and cocaine and all the other hallucinogens, which it really shouldn't be. And there are many reasons anyone should take it out of the category. They don't. We can't get it for pain or discomfort in Wisconsin because our legislature is too dumb to pass a law. Right? All the other states can do it medically. But if you're going to take a gummy, and a lot of people now take it for chronic pain. It's much better than opioids for chronic pain. It won't addict you, it won't habituate you. You can take it or not. If you're going to do it, you have to be very careful, because the emergency room has seen, I think it's a 3-fold or 4-fold injury rate with senior citizens taking gummies to relax or go to sleep. So if you are going to take a gummy, what you want to do is, if you're going to go to one of those shops in Illinois, very easy, I think Sunnyside or Sunnyvale or something is in Janesville. You want to take about 1/4 of a tablet. They're typically 10 milligrams of THC. So you want to take 2.5 milligrams, see if it works. And you want to be in bed when you take it. You don't want to have to walk around, just like you're not going to take 2 or 3 dings. I think it's okay for people with chronic pain. I have a number of patients who have said, I feel better, I can't take anti-inflammatories because I'm on a blood thinner. Tylenol doesn't work for me. They take a gummy in the evening. That's all right. However, taking it throughout the day becomes a different issue and has become a major problem. So just like there's alcoholism, there's something called substance use disorder and cannabis disorder, where people are often taking cannabis throughout the day on a continuous basis. Now, there are side effects from that. Well, among other things, the side effects may be you may fall and become inebriated from it. But the side effect profile is that cannabis in a certain dose can produce delusions. It's a mood-altering drug, which is why people take it. But it can also produce paranoia within that. And that is a side effect that can then kick off other mental issues that are going on. So unfortunately, we don't have a way of studying these things. That's just a side issue with that. All right, what else do we do in the physical sphere? Let's talk about diet. In Wisconsin, we never really followed that great philosopher, Miss Piggy, who once said, never eat more than you can lift. And she was a pig. Now, if you look at the portions in all of that pre-food that we have, it's highly caloric. So if you really want to get a handle on your weight, you really have to look up the calories of things. You really have to do it. It'll give you a better idea. And it's really easy. You go to Google, you write calories, and then you write down what you're looking up. You'll get most of the stuff. What do you think is the most caloric sandwich at Subway? Say something. What is? Come on, shout it out. 1, 2, 3.
The Italian sub.
No, it's the tuna. Because what does tuna have?
Mayo.
It has mayo. It's exactly right. It's always surprising that tuna is so caloric because it has mayo. Because a tablespoonful of mayo is 80 to 100 calories. A lot of calories in mayonnaise. So you want to look at what you're doing. If you're going to get salad dressing, you say you're going to have a nice salad. Yeah, maybe you're going to have a nice salad, but you go with ranch, and that's like 220 calories, which is as many calories in a candy bar. Candy bars are 210 calories, 90% of all candy bars. So you may do that. You may go like that, and all of a sudden you're getting it. So to get a handle on your weight, you must then, that physical sphere, look at calories. The foods that you should have should be plentiful fruits and vegetables. Farmers Market just started in Madison, which is really good. The bigger variety of foods you have, the more micronutrients you are going to get. Do we all know what those micronutrients? No. We don't know what they are. We know they're antioxidants. We know they're good. They're fiber-filled. It should be whole wheat whenever you can. It should be a more Mediterranean diet. Now, a Mediterranean diet includes plentiful fruits and vegetables. It includes, if you're going to have red meat or poultry, it's in smaller amounts. It includes good fats, which actually include olive oil, canola oil, and you can use butter. I used to recommend margarine for everything, but hey, science moves around. It has trans fats. It's not really that good for you. It also, besides that, has nuts and seeds. And if you've never really thought about a Mediterranean diet, go to Google. Once again, you can go to the library here and say, I want to know about it. They'll show you where the website is. You might get a book called Mediterranean Diet for Beginners and begin to look at that way, because that makes a huge difference. Nutrition is critical in that physical sphere. It's critical. Plentiful fruits and vegetables. Getting back for a minute, a minute at supplements. Besides, so we have calcium in supplements. We have vitamin D in there, and of course, then I said we have a multivitamin. If you want to take other supplements, you don't know what you're getting because they're not regulated by the feds. So it might be a pretty label and it might not be in it. So there is a website. It costs money to join the website. It's called consumerlab.com, and they check each and every supplement, and they tell you what is the cheapest and inexpensive of that supplement. So for instance, I went to Costco. You've heard of Costco, right? It's right. It's like I say Amazon. But I looked at Costco, and their Costco CoQ10, which may be useful for people with heart disease. So you may want to try it. A lot of cardiologists are recommending it. The Costco brand is about maybe 50% less than the name brand. It's a house brand, and house brands mean that they get it manufactured and they know what they're doing. So if you're going to get supplements and you believe in supplements, then you either want to use a house brand like Costco, Walmart, Walgreens, and so on, or you want to go to consumerlab.com and look up one, or go to the library and they'll look it up because Consumer Reports has it too, and make sure it's a supplement that actually has things. This is within the physical sphere. Before I go to the next sphere, exercise. Where does that fit into your day? Now, if you want to know how many steps you're actually taking, 10,000 steps was made up to sell pedometers in Japan 30 years ago. And that's because 10,000 is a lucky number in Japan. So it's a made-up number. It turns out if you are taking fewer than 1,500 steps a day, that goes to fragility in your bones and makes you more likely to be frail. So if you drop below really 1,500, but if you drop below 2,000, you're not doing very much at all. And once you get to about 4,000 to 5,000, you get a tremendous amount of benefit. 4,000 to 5,000. You get a bit more at 7,000. After that, you don't necessarily get more in terms of cardiovascular and other forms of death. Okay? So if you don't have a smartwatch, which I'm pretty dumb about at times. I was trying to figure out how to use this. I'm a pretty techie guy, and I thought, man, what am I doing? It's got the wrong screen on even now. But you can go to Walmart, or you can go online, and you can get a step counter for $29.95. Very easy to get it. Put it on there, see how many steps you're actually getting. You will be surprised. And then if you're not getting at least 2,000 steps, you got to do more. And if you're not getting that, you should really go to 4,000 or 5,000 and figure out how you're going to introduce that into your life. Now, if you're outside gardening, great. You don't really have to worry about steps that day. You're outside gardening. If you're doing housework around the house and you're vacuuming, doing other things, that counts as exercise. So you can look at that as exercise. But we are made to move. The importance of exercise is not simply for cardiovascular health, but it's to make it less likely that we are going to fall and die from falling. It's very important. So there are 3 components to exercise that I want you to look at. And then I want you to go home and inventory what you're doing. That's why you've got these little pencils stuff. Number 1, Are you getting your heart going at all? Do it once a week or twice a week. You may want to do it by just walking a little bit faster. You may want to do it if you belong to a gym or Anytime Fitness, and if you don't, you may want to think about it. You may want to do something at the Fitchburg Senior Center. But you got to get your heart going once or twice a week. 15 or 20 minutes, twice a week, it's going to mean something. That's aerobic. Now, if you want to do more, that's great, but a minimum of a couple of times a week, you get your heart going. How fast you get it going? Feel like you're doing something, like you're sweating. You know, the number for true aerobic exercise is 80% of your maximal heart rate. You calculate the maximal heart rate by going 220 minus your age. So if you're 100, your maximal heart rate is 120. And if it's 80%, it's 80% of 120. So it's roughly about 100 beats a minute, just as a ballpark, or rather close to 85, 90 beats a minute. But anyway, that's what you should do. That's number one. Number two is balance, because balance will keep you from falling, keeps you up. What can you do for balance? Once again, the Fitchburg Senior Center has excellent programs where you're moving. Dancing is good for balance. Walking is good for balance. Go to YouTube and look up balance exercise. Standing on one foot and trying to stand on one foot is good for balance. Anything you do is going to make it reflex when you're going down the street in the winter or the summer, and you will be less likely to fall. Because less likely to fall, you need reflex. You often can't think as you're going down. But the goal is to say, oh my God, I felt like I was going to trip, but I didn't. Well, that's because you have balance. And the third thing is strength. Now, the data on strength training has come out in the last year and a half is incredible. So I'm not talking about looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, although if you look at him nowadays and then there, he doesn't look really very good. But he did years ago, And for the guys, forget the six-pack abs, even if you had it in your 20s. Once you get to your 40s or 50s, it's six-pack sags, not six-pack abs. I just figured that out, sags. That was a joke. But anyway, so strengthening means getting these little 2-pound weights around, either in your house, and doing stuff with even 2 pounds or 4 pounds and doing it. It's especially important for women. We've discovered now that about 20 minutes roughly 20 minutes a week to 30 minutes a week of minimal strengthening exercises reduces the risk of heart attack and stroke. Kind of interesting. And this data is really new data. It's only come out within the last year or 2 years that it shows because we've talked about aerobics for so long, we often don't talk about balance, but it turns out strength is critically important in that physical sphere. So that's what you want to do. You want to look at your exercise and say, what am I doing? After you do the first part of looking around your house. Now let's talk about the mind, mood, and brain sphere. Okay? Let's talk about the brain. Brain is an amazing organ. We do a lot with brain. I have good news about Alzheimer's and dementia. So first of all, there is no blood test to show if you have Alzheimer's. None at all. There is a test to see if you have big strokes, MRI test, CT scans, but for the most part, they'll miss the small strokes. And there's no test to see if you've Lewy body dementia, which often is associated with Parkinsonism. The reality is people who begin to have a memory loss, a significant memory loss over the years, we don't really know what they have for the most part. We don't know. And I don't like the word dementia because once we have dementia, it's sort of like, it's a bad word. It used to be like cancer years ago. People don't even like to say it because they're afraid they catch it. But once we have a neurological dysfunction that begins to affect our brain, so it begins to affect our function, that's the issue. Now, years ago, when we had to remember phone numbers, we all remembered our friends' phone numbers because it was the only way to call them. Now, we just have to remember how to use our cell phone to find the numbers. We don't remember the numbers. Now, I'm convinced if we had to remember the numbers, we would still do it because we would put our energy toward it and we would repeat it over and over again. When I talk about neurological dysfunction, I'm talking about doing things, not remembering how to walk, where the bathroom is, those other things. Now, the Alzheimer's long-term Framingham heart study has looked at groups of people. There's Framingham 1 and Framingham 2. And now there'll be Framingham 3. They started in the 1970s, And they've been following people over the years. And they had a second study that started in the 90s too. So they looked at people, and then Northwestern has a study called the Healthy Aging Brain Study, and there's another study called the Nun Study. So I'm going to give you the good news about dementia. But the Alzheimer's study, neurological dysfunction, the Alzheimer's study is quite interesting in Framingham. So there are things called epochs. These are 10-year groups. Okay, so if you look at the prevalence of memory loss from 1980 to 1990, from 1990 to 2000, from 2000 to 2010, and 2010 to 2020, okay, we have 4 different groups of 10 years. There's been an incredible reduction on a per capita basis of dementia, significant dementia, of about 35 to 40%. Even though it's a lot of numbers that have it, there's been a tremendous reduction. And if you follow it over this 40-year period of 10-year periods, you can see the reduction has increased more and more. In other words, there's actually less, even though we all know people with it. It's a slower course and a less reduction. In all groups but one, high school dropouts. High school dropouts have the same rate of dementia today as they did in 1980. There's no difference at all. Then you go, why is that the case? Well, think about it. High school dropouts often make less money, read less, more likely to smoke cigarettes, lifestyle, may not eat as well, lifestyle issues, many different things. Not take their cholesterol, not take their blood pressure medications. Because a lot of memory loss is from cholesterol and blood pressure medicines that we're on, very important. So, and also eating correctly and lifestyle things. So the good news is that what we're doing for cardiovascular health, exercise, cholesterol, blood pressure, stents, and other things, is affecting our brain, which is an organ just like our heart. And some of that is probably from fewer strokes, little mini strokes that we can't pick up yet. And some of it may be because of the plaques and tangles of Alzheimer's. We don't really know. But that is the good news. So let's look at other things that you can do for your memory. And once again, it's like buckling up. You buckle up and you go down the road and you're driving right at the right speed. You may still get into a car crash, right? Because of the other guy. And you might still die. And the car may still slip. Something may happen. But you still buckle up and you make sure that you don't go too fast, even down Fish Hatchery Road, even in there, because you want to make sure that you don't get into an accident. And when there's ice on the road, you don't go out of the house unless you absolutely have to. So we do things like that for our physical space. What do we do with our mental space? You want to keep your brain going. The second thing is intellectual engagement of the brain. And what does that mean? So they always say do crossword puzzles. I hate crossword puzzles. I hate them. Last time crossword puzzle I did was in high school. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do crossword puzzles. But you can engage in other things. And part of that is reading. Reading engages different parts of your brain than watching TV. Watching TV is relaxing and soothing, but you don't have to use your brain because you're using your vision, you're looking at it, your brain is not working. Reading gives you imagination. It doesn't really make a difference what you read, but you're using your imagination. And there's more and more data that shows that reading is important. We know it's important for little kids. It really improves their IQ. But it's actually important as we get older, reading. The other thing, and that's critically important, using your brain for something. You could probably also do the quadratic equation, but I haven't used that since high school. But reading is critically important. The other thing is we know that exercise improves brain function. Any kind of exercise. So once again, that's part of that physical sphere. So that's the brain. So there's brain in this other pillar. There's mind. Now mind is calmness. The things that we worry about are those things that we have no control over. Those are the things that tend to bother us the most. The things that we don't have any control over. And sometimes they just come into us and we think about them over and over again. And they interfere for the rest of our lives. So what do we do about that? Now, I've had the pleasure and the benefit. I know His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I've been involved with his care for many, many years. And when he's come to Madison, my wife Penny arranged for all of the visits pretty much when he came there. And he stayed with us in 1981 in our house, which is, we had 3 little kids. We were out of the house. We cleaned up the house and worked with that, a whole bunch of things. I'll tell you a story. clean up the house. You know, if the Dalai Lama is going to come to your house, you want it to be perfect, right? You have 3 kids, 3, 2, and 1. How do you get the house perfect? It's really tough. So, you know, so we're doing stuff. We're going to stay at a friend's house. We're going to make sure there's food in the house. We have it. We're walking into the house. The kids were not there at that time. They were with our grandma Terry, the babysitter. And, but the house, you know, we're getting it as clean as we can. He's going to be there with an entourage of other people. And we take all of our crap and we're putting it in the basement behind a door, right? All of your stuff, because you want it to be perfect. And he walks in the house and says, thank you, looks around the house. First thing he does is go in the basement, open up the back door in the basement. And he starts laughing. He said, you didn't have to do this for me. And I'll never forget that. I thought, oh my God, he went to the basement. We put it there so he wouldn't see it. But it was part of the whole thing. But he talks about intellectual stimulation. But he also talks about 2 other things that are important for calmness. Mindfulness, which is now come. And mindfulness is kind of interesting. We've gotten away from the word meditation, which has, you know, which has an Eastern sort of influence to it. But mindfulness, and there are many apps about mindfulness that you can get on your phone now, are really ways to calm your mind, which really, they won't solve the problems that you can't solve, but they really begin to give you insight if you spend 5 minutes, that's all, 5 minutes a day. There's an app that I highly recommend called HM, Healthy Minds. Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin in the Department of Psychology was very important in the development of the app. It doesn't cost anything. It has 1 million users now. There are a lot of apps that cost $4.99 a month. This app costs nothing at all. And once you learn to use it, and if you don't, ask your 12-year-old or 10-year-old grandchild or great-grandchild, and they'll set it up for you because they know how to do it. They're tech savvy. But seriously, they have wonderful mindfulness apps. After my wife Penny passed away, I used to do Zen meditation. I started using that app. I just used it for 10 minutes in the morning. It made a big difference. So mindfulness can center the mind, which then begins to not only allow you to solve some of your problems within that sphere, but it also moves you to a better mood. And let's talk about mood for just a minute. We give a short shrift to anxiety and depression. You know, we say, you know, blood pressure is important to treat and cholesterol. When people have mental problems, we go, well, you can get over this. You can try to get over this. We do give the short shrift. We have a prejudice against mental problems ourselves. We go, well, I really don't have a problem. Everyone says I'm depressed, but I'm really not depressed. And this is really a problem because it interferes with care. And care is very important. We know that depression, significant depression, is as much of a risk factor as a cholesterol over 250 and a blood pressure that's out of control. We know that. Why? Because it produces adrenaline, produces a bunch of adrenal hormones that then are not good for our heart. So if you have depression or anxiety, there are many things one can do. First of all, really good antidepressants. They work well. There are a whole bunch of different ones that are in there too. If one doesn't work, another one will. You find a primary care doctor that will work with you with that. Cognitive behavioral therapy, excellent therapy that is all around and available. Hard sometimes to find a therapist, insurance, because there's a reduction of them, but that can be very, very useful. That can be very, very useful too. Or a combination of both. But it's very important to look at mood. And it's very important because as we get older, depression increases. Why? Because we tend to lose function. It's worse in men than in women. If you look at the suicide rate, the per capita suicide rate among young people, men and women, stays about the same until the age of 25 or 30. And then women, the per capita rate, the prevalence of suicide among women is pretty stable for the rest of their life. But the per capita rate of men goes up and higher and higher. So men, a 70-year-old man is more likely to commit suicide than a 17-year-old boy. The 17-year-old boy, it's a disaster, and we think about it. The 70-year-old man, it's a disaster, but it's not the same as the 17-year-old boy. And so recognizing, and we don't recognize suicide that well, but we do know that depression and anxiety can lead for that within there. So what's in the social pillar? The social pillar is that third pillar. We had physical, we talked about. We had the material, environmental. We just talked about mind, brain, and mood. The social pillar are interactions with people. Now, you know, if you think back to COVID, it's a very interesting thing. We kind of don't really remember what went on, except it didn't feel good, because we didn't make a lot of memories within that. But social interactions are critically important. It's thought that one of the reasons that women do not have the same suicidal rate is that they generally have better social interactions, stronger than men do. Generally, they do. Why? Probably over mothering, other things. There are a whole bunch of reasons that may occur with that. But generally, that's the case. And that's a broad stroke I'm doing. But social interactions are important. The problem is, as we get older, our friends die. They're not around anymore. We all had good friends that we can't talk to. My friend Larry, I went whitewater rafting with him. We were friends in high school. He's my friend who just died, a couple of months ago. I went out to visit him before he died, California. I can't do stuff with him. I can't talk to him. How do I replace that? And that's a big issue as you get older. So you have to look at your social interactions and write that down. It may be you don't have enough. And it may be that means coming to the Fitchburg Senior Center, or going to your church group, or going to some other group that you like, or maybe taking up something different. Now, my wife Penny, we were together for 50 years. We had lots of interactions. I'm really very blessed with that. But I've been thinking about things that interest me that I've never done before. So 3 days ago, I got on a horse. I'm afraid of horses. I got on a horse. I walked around with this. I'd written about this in the newspaper, and a nice older woman, younger than me, but she's older, said, I've got a horse that's older than both of us. It's like 30 years old, which is old for a horse. I walked it around a couple times because I'm afraid of horses. They're really big. They're not like a dog down here. They're up here. And then she said, when are you going to get up on the horse? And I said, I don't know. And she said, how about today? I went there with my ski helmet. I got up on a horse. It was a lot of fun. And I thought, this stretches that. And I now, because I'm going to take horseback riding lessons, and yes, I may fall and hurt myself. Sorry. Sorry, Mom. But at least I'll, hurt myself having a good time versus slipping on the sidewalk in front of my house. But I thought about that, and then I had another friend who I saw the other day, who on the east side, who teaches tap dancing, and she said, I'm doing tap dancing for seniors. I'm going to do that. So these are interactions that I'm replacing because my friends are getting older. I have a good friend of mine, and I'm going to go a little bit past the 2 o'clock. You don't mind, because this room is, and if you're leaving because you have to go somewhere, feel free to leave. Friend of mine, so his mother moved. They lived in New York City. They lived in Brooklyn. And then ultimately, they moved up north to another town because it was cheaper and it was less expensive. And he didn't do anything. His dad just sat there in a chair, basically did not have a good life. But she joined book groups. And then when she died about 10, 15 years later after she moved up there, he didn't really know that, my friend Stuart. He said when they were at the funeral, there were all these people that were 20 years younger than she was, 20 and 30 years younger, that he didn't know about. Were in the book group that she joined through the library because she liked to read. Well, think about it, she was the older person in the book group, so when there was a discussion, she was the old person giving her perspective, but then she got younger people's perspective. So part of the social pillar in social interactions is making relationships with people 20 years younger than you or more, because they see the world differently. Little kids are wonderful. 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, if you can find them, they have a different way of looking at life, and they will enrich you, and you will enrich them. How do you do that? Friends and family and church and other interactions. But the social sphere is actually an incredibly important part of your longevity. First of all, it enriches your life. It's a problem because when you're younger, it's easier to find it. When you're older, it's more difficult, not impossible. It enriches your life. And you begin to do things because the social people around you are beginning to do things. So think about other interactions that you can have within community groups, because your friends tend to, as I say, they're not around anymore, they move on. That's an important pillar too. Then, of course, it may be making peace with those family members you don't have peace with anymore. We all have those. Some are more significant than others. We all have those. So my wife Penny, one of her sisters died. The other sister, Margie, lives in Florida. And there are times that we've had words. And I decided after, we've had words, we've had interactions. And I decided, you know what? It's time. I don't remember the words, and besides, it was 20 years ago, and we should at least bring it to a neutral state, which we have. It was good. I have another cousin who I visited, my mom's family. I first saw her when she was 8 months old, and now she's 67. And I had never seen her. She was coming through, moved to Montana, coming through Madison. She didn't know I lived in Madison. She thought I still lived in Chicago. I haven't been there since I was 18. And I made relationships with her. I may go visit her or something. So we have the ability to find other relationships, which are critical to our well-being. Do not just think it's due to cholesterol and supplements. It's also the social pillar. So I want you to write down, today or now, what can you do to improve your social pillar? What can you do? This is sometimes really hard. It's kind of almost embarrassing. You're younger, it's easy. You can be around friends and family and stuff. When you're older, it's not. But there are other things that are around. Just think about it. When you leave today, go home and think about, what can I do with that? So we have physical, we have brain, mind, and mood. We have our social pillar, we have the material. And the final one is our spiritual pillar. What nourishes our heart and our soul? So for many people, it's their religious path. Many people, interesting. Now, I am Jewish by culture, so there's certain things I do. We had a Seder the other day with some wonderful friends. We used to have a Seder at our house, but wonderful friends. I'll have a virtual Seder with my kids. 2 are in Seattle. 1 is in Boston. It'll be great. And then I'll have a little Seder at our house end of the week, and that really is important to me. I am also, for me, Buddhist. My son, Zach. So Zach's wife is from Brazil, and she's a church girl. So she goes to Blackhawk Church. So I was up in Minocqua, and I have friends there who are Catholic, and they said, I want to come to Mass? I said, sure, why not? I'd like to come to Mass. Beautiful church. There were 3 Catholic churches that were not doing well, and they built a beautiful church made out of wood. If you're ever in Minocqua, whether you're Catholic or not, go look at the church. It's drop dead, incredibly gorgeous. And I went to the Mass. It was quite interesting. There were some young people, but mostly people who were older at the Catholic Mass. Okay. So then I went to Blackhawk Church for a Christmas show, totally different. Instead of books, it's up, there are television screens up. You walk in, there's music, it's different, there's food, whole different feel to it. And the people are younger because there's daycare over there and there's food. And you walk out, there's a lot of food in there. Food always, in Wisconsin, it always brings people out. If there's free food, sure, I'll come to church, get a cupcake. But it was very interesting because I find, and then of course I go to India at least once a year, and I see this whole Tibetan thing. So religion may be very important to you, and that is part of that, I think, a very important part of your life then, to engage in that. But I also think that within there's the spiritual sphere, is also art and music and Mother Nature. And now the weather is getting warmer. So going out and walking in a park in Mother Nature and working in your garden in Mother Nature is critically important. And going and listening to music that you like, maybe even live music that you like, but certainly on there. And going and looking at artware that you like, going to one of the art museums in Madison, or just looking at that, or around your house. Those are an important part of it because once again, we neglect that part. We can neglect that as an important part of our life to keep us going. But that's part of our motivation. It also really helps during the times of death. Very much so. I'm very much involved with hospice over the years, and people who often have a spiritual path. It can be an agnostic spiritual path, or it can be a spiritual path that's religious. But if they have a spiritual path and believe that there's just something beyond here that we don't understand, that's enough to help people in the throes of that. And I want to talk a little bit about that spiritual sphere and death and the importance of hospice. Now, hospice is really interesting. Back when I went to medical school in the dark ages in the 1970s, and there really was no hospice. And I was head of our medical student council. We brought Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to speak about hospice in the beginning of the hospice movement. And there were a number of medical schools in our group. University of Illinois, Rush Medical College, Loyola was just down the road, in Chicago Medical School, and there was a big lecture hall in Cook County Hospital where some of the big lectures were given. And she was going to speak there, which is great. And a week before, Morton Bogdanoff, head of the U of I Medicine, awful guy, terrible guy, smoked cigarettes on the wards. That's when smoked in the hospital. Awful, really not a good person. Edited one of the JAMA Archives of Internal Medicine, and he believed he knew everything. And he said nobody should come to hear Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talk about hospice. Our job is to save lives, not to kill people. Now remember, this is not Kevorkian. Kevorkian was terrible. This is hospice. And it was the very beginning of it. So we had a big room. We had put up brochures and everything. I'll tell you how many people showed up besides the group. Maybe 10 people. Nobody showed up. They totally didn't show up. That's where the hospice movement was in the 70s. The idea was, no, do everything. People who had cancer, just give them more chemotherapy to end their lives, even though they're vomiting out ideas to save their lives. It was terrible. And then what happened was hospice changed. You, the consumers, decided you wanted a different way. So the problem with hospice that we still have is, it's never too soon to call hospice. You don't call them when it's too late. So people say, oh, I'm giving up with hospice. Well, once you go to hospice, there are things you can't do. You can't go in the hospital and get more tests. What you don't know, what people don't realize is you can go off of hospice any moment you want to. You can go to the emergency room and say, I'm giving up hospice, I want to have more tests done. You can do that. That's not the goal in hospice. But many people get hospice in the last day or 2 days or 3 days of their lives, when in fact they could do it sooner than that. And the problem often is the social sphere of relatives around them that are not allowing them to see what's going on to help them in their journey through life when they may be suffering and going downhill. Now, if they have pain and discomfort, it's one thing. But I mention that because that is part of the spiritual sphere, is to look at hospice and then make determinations sooner versus later to help people get ushered out of life, because it's going to happen. And you may get help from your neighbors, you may get help from your priest or your minister or your rabbi or your omen. But that's part of your spiritual sphere, is looking in that direction. So once again, we have a physical sphere. We have a brain, mind, and mood sphere, columns. We have basically a social column, social sphere. We have a spiritual sphere. And then we have our lives, and we're living with our lives. So a couple of years ago, and I'm gonna wrap this up in just a minute. A couple of years ago, I spoke at the Fitchburg Senior Center was downstairs, about this. And then a little old guy came up to me and said, Dr. Pastor, how old do you think I am? I have learned never to answer that question. I said, 60. He said, I'm 102. I said, wow, you don't look a day over 80, which is true. And I said, I defined it. In the lecture, I defined old age as 25 years older than you are today. When you're 25, old age is 50. When you're 50, it's 75. 75, it's 100. I said, what's old age to you? And he looked at me with a twinkle in his eye, and he said, 103. I thought that was really a good answer. So part of the way that you can go on your own personal journey, and they're all different, is to look at a mentor who has done a good job of aging. Now, that person may be gone. Maybe somebody you read about. Maybe somebody you know right now. But there are people who have done a good job of aging. And if you look at what they've done, if you know them and they're still alive, kind of follow and see what they've done, you will have a mentor to help you on your journey. But your journey can actually ultimately get to what I call a long sleeve life, if you make some changes. And you've got a few things you've already written down on these little golf pencils, that's what they're called. And if you go home, do something, and begin to say, what are you going to do in your house? You can look at the low-hanging fruit or the upper fruit, but there are things that you can do to make your life better and actually improve your longevity. So thank you very much, and I'll be up here to answer any questions. Thank you.